This case is important in property, equity, and statutory interpretation. This case note looks at statutory interpretation aspects. Mr. Nelson was a Second World War veteran, so he was entitled to a war service home loan with a concessional interest rate. He died, and his wife became entitled to the concessional loan. The family sold 2 properties and used the proceeds to purchase a new property in the name of the Nelsons' adult children. Mrs. Nelson then separately purchased a property using the war service loan. They made this arrangement because to get the concessional loan, Mrs. Nelson had to declare that she did not own any other property. She could do this if the property was in the children's name, even though she had provided the money. Westpac learned about the scheme and demanded the repayment of the interest concessions. According to the strict wording of the statute, Mrs. Nelson had done nothing wrong. She did not own other property. However, the purpose of the rule was to restrict war service loans to veterans who did not have other property, whereas she effectively did have an interest in other property. The court had to give a clear explanation of its approach to interpreting the statutory rule. There is a doctrine of statutory interpretation called literal interpretation, where the courts simply interpret the words of the statute without any reference to their context or purpose. The court linked this approach to the jurisprudential theory of positivism, which holds that the law is whatever is written down and does not include appeals to things like tradition and morality, sometimes called the equity of the statute. The court cited one of the fathers of positivism, Jeremy Bentham, saying, "The doctrine of the equity of the statute attracted the ire of Bentham. He described it as a further branch of customary law which struck its roots into the substance of the statute law and infected statute law with its own characteristic obscurity, uncertainty, and confusion." Despite Bentham, the court found that in Australia it was proper to look to the purpose of the statute, which was to restrict concessional loans to those who needed them. Mrs. Nelson was not entitled to a loan and had to pay back the interest. This case links the literal approach to statutory interpretation with positivism and reminds us that the literal approach is not appropriate in Australian law.